Hello, and welcome to the Smart Recovery Podcast, where we offer thoughtful conversation about a variety of recovery topics. You'll hear self-empowering and science-based approaches to making changes toward a healthier and more satisfying lifestyle and building a life beyond addiction. Our mission is for every podcast to provide you with the information and resources you need to guide your own successful recovery journey. If you or someone you know needs addiction-related help, we encourage you to visit smartrecovery.org, where you will find practical tools, connections to support group meetings, and links for additional resources. Remember that the purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. It is not a substitute for medical care from a doctor or other qualified addiction professionals. Before making any changes in your treatment plan, please discuss your thoughts with your medical provider. Now sit back and enjoy today's Smart Recovery Podcast.
Welcome to the Smart Recovery Podcast. This is your host, Luke Frazier. Today on the podcast, we have two smart recovery experts. And once you hear them talk, you will agree that they are experts and very excellent trainers. First, we have Lorie Hammerstrom. She is the lead on-site trainer for Smart Recovery. How many years have you been doing that, Lorie?
Since 2016, so however many years, is that 5?
Oh, good. Yeah, that's a half decade. Yeah. We also are going to talk with Rae Grady. She is an on-site trainer. She has a lot of experience with adolescents. She'll get into that in a moment. But also you have experience designing youth training for Smart Recovery. How long have you been with Smart Recovery?
I'm the baby of the group, I think, in training. I've been there almost 2 years.
Okay. All right. Well, you know what? I asked you those questions, but I forgot to say good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right.
Pleasure to be here.
And you said there were no trick questions, but I had to do math.
Yeah, right. Well, you're not required to do math to be a trainer. You're just required to be knowledgeable and engaging and full of information. So I bet you do that just fine. Lorie, let's start with you. Tell me a little bit about your professional background and some of your personal background to the extent you wish to share.
All right. So I'm a science teacher, or am a retired science teacher. Have always loved working with kids and just seem to have a knack for it. But as a teen, I will say that I experienced struggles in those late teen years, did experiment with drugs and alcohol, just quit at some point by myself. But the bigger issue was not having any life goals. And I remember when I was a senior in high school saying, I'm not going to college. I hate school. And then lived out 5 years before I finally realized, well, maybe I will go to college. So I've kind of been in the struggle that I feel like a lot of the teens are in. And so I really appreciate being able to share that journey with them to help them be more focused on where they want to.
Yeah, you make a great point. Recovery can include things like drifting into or not knowing where you want to go in life, not knowing how it all fits together. Smart Recovery's 4-point program has the fourth point is live a healthy and balanced life. And that's exactly what teen and younger adults really sometimes need. We all can need it. Let's not mince words. I need that too.
Absolutely.
Rae, tell me a little bit about your personal and professional background. I know you've had a lot of years working in adolescent treatment.
Yes, I have. I'm probably the old lady in the group here. So I actually started my career as a guidance counselor in an inner city high school in Cleveland. And very much learned after just a short time that I wish I had a lot more experience behind me in dealing with the things that the young people were struggling with. I grew up in a small inner city neighborhood myself, so I was a little bit familiar with some of that. I left that job to have my children. I have three kids, and they've all had struggles, as most teens do, with first use and experimenting and even maybe getting in a little too deep with things. But I went back to work working for first the health department and worked with AIDS patients and did a lot of education in the schools with kids around AIDS. And then I worked for 23 years for an adolescent counseling service doing prevention. So I did a lot of groups in the schools and worked with kids that were getting in trouble because they were just starting to use and they were being caught. And I did a group at the detention home for almost 20 years. And that was sort of a revolving door of kids who were always coming back. And typically it was because of problems with alcohol and drugs that led to other things.
Yeah. Was there any
working with kids? And I'm really hoping that I can do more of that with SMART because I miss working with them.
Yeah. Well, that's excellent. Did you know about SMART Recovery when you were doing adolescent treatment or in the detention center? Either of those places? Did SMART make an appearance?
No, I did not. I didn't really learn about SMART until I worked for our local alcohol and drug and mental health board and was their community educator and crisis team coordinator. And as you can imagine, most of the crises we responded to were school-related things, suicides and overdoses and accidents. And of course, alcohol and drugs were big pieces of all of those things. And a very good friend of mine who happens to be assistant director of SMART, she introduced me to it. So when I retired, it seemed like a good fit to jump into that because I really feel like SMART's principles are things that kids can grab onto. They make sense to them and they're very empowering.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Now, Lorie, how did you first learn about SMART Recovery?
So when I was older, I had quit drinking and everything way back then when I was younger. And then when I was older, interestingly enough, some of the school systems, I was in middle school at the time, are kind of, the teachers are sort of drinking culture people and they go out to the bars. And so I started drinking and then got caught up in drinking to relieve stress. And then, and then that turned into more, lots of stuff. And so I couldn't get myself to stop. And so I didn't want to go to AA because of some imaginary thing I have in my head about that, but decided to read the Rational Recovery book. I don't know if you're familiar, but and then that didn't seem like a good fit. Somebody said to me, go to SMART Recovery. And I went, and then that was it. I just loved SMART Recovery from that moment.
Kind of an immediate attraction, immediate connection with that.
The tools were just something that I needed in my life.
So, Lorie, you mentioned you had a really strong connection to those tools and to some of the ways that SMART approached this idea of substance use disorders and other kinds of things. Do you think teens also have a special connection to that or in some way relate to it?
I think one of the things that I can say with teens is the thing that they like the best is that here they come to a meeting and, oh, look, I'm not the only one who's having this struggle. So the group together is critical, I think, for teens because they think they're having a problem. They know they're having a problem, but they feel like they're out there all by themselves. And so that part is really good.
Yeah.
But working with the tools and the teens, I'll say that they do a great job with them. And especially the more they look like a school lesson, and I would never call it that to them, but the more it looks like that, the easier they fall into it and start participating because that's kind of what they're used to doing.
Okay.
Right? If you ask them to just, introspect and talk about themselves, that doesn't go well. But bringing in tools for teens works fabulous.
Yeah. So
that works really well. But I will tell you that I actually ended up using the SMART Recovery tools with my own son. He was like a senior in high school. He had just a little bit of maybe paranoia kind of thing. Being social was a struggle. And so anyway, we had taken him to therapists. And there just wasn't a good match. We finally found a therapist who was willing to let me bring SMART Recovery tools. And she had the great personality. And the three of us would sit there and talk about issues. And this boy who used to be a little paranoid, he's the most chilled human being I know.
That's
he's 30 now, so easy to get along with. And I have always credited SMART Recovery tools with that.
Wow. That's interesting. In my case, I had a son who also was getting in trouble, was actually arrested for possession. And I didn't know about smart recovery yet, but maybe just naturally, I agreed with a principal that kind of straightened out values or questioned values and priorities. And I used to ask him, well, Noah, what's your priority here? Is it band and jazz band, or is it hanging out with your friends and getting high? And it gave him pause. It gave him an ability to look at what he was doing, the actions he was taking, to question them. And it really helped him move on from doing that kind of thing. So it's, it's funny, you knew about SMART and wanted to apply the tools. I didn't know about SMART, but somehow wanted to apply similar tools.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm listening to you guys and I'm thinking, wow, I came into this in a totally different way. I wish I had known about SMART back when my kids were struggling. And when I took the training, the facilitator training online, I kind of made somewhat of a connection in my head to these things, thinking that, this seems like it could work. And these are good things. Teens probably would like that. I agree with Lorie that they're kind of a school approach, that might make them comfortable. Because if you've ever done a support group with a bunch of teens, there's just lots of silence when they have to share feelings. This stuff is very interactive and hands-on and something they can jump in and get excited about. But as I was saying, when I was taking that training, my head was engaged, but my heart didn't really get engaged until I came across the lighthouse tool, where it talks about being the lighthouse on the shore and just shining your light, and that the lighthouse can't jump out into the water and grab the boat by the lapels and shake them and go, what are you doing? I was the mom that was doing that. I was the mom that was shaking their lapels and screaming in their face, and that wasn't working.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how was that working, Rae?
That was not working. It wasn't working for any of us. What worked was getting the law and probation and me learning to back off. I would have done that so much sooner if I had known about SMART. And I'm right now I'm doing a family and friends group, and I see that same struggle with the folks that are in my group. They're those parents that are struggling with their kids and trying to learn to back off, because kids are doing what they're doing. They're trying to separate from their parents. That's what they're doing when they're teenagers. And so some parent jumping in their face, waving their fist or shaking their finger is just making it worse and playing into that.
Right. Right.
Yeah. I would say that I learned this with the family and friends with Rae. Rae and I have kind of done a lot together, but we started the family and friends together, or I started to support her. But the family and friends portion, there's some tools in there that aren't really a part of the other programs, but one of them is communication. And I realized that the teens need to learn to communicate, because, when they come to mom and dad and ask for something, they don't do it very well. And what a great idea it would be. So I started using that. Occasionally I'll bring up the communication, piece. But I very quickly realized if mom and dad aren't getting it on the other side, then that's a problem. So one of the things I would definitely encourage for parents who are looking for help for their child is to do it not together, but have the child come to Smart Recovery meetings and also go to family and friends meetings. So that that communication piece can be intact there.
You're listening to the Smart Recovery Podcast. This is your host, Luke Frazier. You were just listening to Lorie Hammerstrom. She's the lead on-site trainer for SMART. We're also joined by Rae Grady. She's an on-site trainer herself and has a lot of experience. And I want to go back to that for just a moment, Rae. Do you think, as a training professional, that training in really any setting, any context, whether it's with different ages, whether it's businesses or nonprofits, do you think there are similar kinds of techniques? And I mean, how do you improve and be part of continuous improvement as a trainer?
That's an interesting question. And again, I guess I wasn't prepared for exactly that slant on things. Okay, so what I would say about that is there are certain basic skills that I think every trainer needs, and that's to be able to have rapport and make a connection with your audience, to be excited about the training so that you can get them excited too. I like to kind of treat folks in my training as if they're a room full of my friends. That I'm an old Tupperware lady, so doing the thing in somebody's living room, that kind of makes me a little bit.
I love Tupperware, Rae. Do you have any extra samples you could send my way?
I still have a whole bunch of that stuff in my basement.
Anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted. It's using that, getting people comfortable, treating them as your friends. What other skills are good for trainers and that apply also to teens and younger adults?
Well, I think where the young people are concerned, it really helps to not treat them in a condescending manner. I'm the adult, I'm the expert in the room. You guys are just here to learn from me. And that's actually helpful for every training, really. We're all learning from each other.
Mm-hmm.
But with young people, I think the more that we value their experience and their ideas and their hopes and dreams, the better things are going to go, especially with motivation, because I don't know what motivates them. They are the only ones that know what motivates them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's helpful for any training, is we're going to learn when we feel like it's valuable to us.
That's right. When it means something to us.
Try to find that,
Right. That's
that's kind of a role I see of a facilitator, is helping people sort of find how this is going to work for them.
Yeah. Lorie, you heard Rae's answer to the question about kind of training skills and how they apply. You were a teacher, a science teacher, I think you said. Was there classroom skills that also apply to doing training?
Probably. I mean, I'm sure there are, but the thing for me was it was always just a natural thing. And so I had student teachers at points where I'm just like, how do they not know that? And it's just that I never had to learn it. It was just somehow natural. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I will say what Rae said is right, is being able to create relationship. And that would be probably the most critical piece of being a teacher in a classroom and being a trainer and being a facilitator, is create relationships with the people that you're working with. Mm-hmm. And the better you can do that, the more they're going to buy in. But I will tell you the thing, I'm going to jump into another question, but
sure.
But the thing that I found, and it's one thing, is it's going to take a while. It takes a while to get a team meeting off the ground, because they're nervous. Don't blame them. And your skill has to be developed. And even though I taught school for 32 years, I had to develop mm-hmm. what it was going to take to make this work.
It's a different subject. It's a whole different, I mean, there's a lot of emotions tied to why a kid is using or being, acting in a certain kind of way.
Right. There's that, but there's also, how can I create that relationship? Mm-hmm. What is the tool? And so there's a lot of trial and error, because I can tell you what I do, but if you try and do it, that might not work for you. Right. So you get a lot of trial and error. So a few weeks ago, or maybe a couple of months now, I decided, I brought this song with me, and I said, it's kind of like a recovery song. If you listen to it, listen to this song. So I honestly think they thought it was lame and whatever.
They got to laugh at you together. How about that?
No, well, one of them said, oh yeah, I think my dad used to talk about the group Queen. I'm like, okay, good.
What's the song? Now you got me interested. What's the song? We Are the Champions of the World?
No, not that one. I can't think of the name of it now.
Okay, well, it was a song that to you had a resonance with recovery.
I want to break free.
Okay. Well, that's a great thing, because just by exposing yourself or, sharing of yourself and saying, hey, check this out. And you probably did it in a way, I'm assuming you did it in a way that was comfortable. So they felt comfortable to say, that's not really our cup of tea. And I love that when people say my dad did this or that.
Right?
I've gotten that a few times, and it's like, wow, okay, well, you know what? We all age. That's one thing we all have in common. How about that?
Yes. So anyway, from there, I invited them to find recovery songs.
Mhm.
And it has developed into not necessarily recovery songs. Some of them are just feel good songs, but doesn't even matter. At this point, I realized that they love that part.
Mhm. Mhm.
So they get to bring a song, we play it. Sometimes we even do two if we have time at the end.
Yeah,
And,
that's good.
and it just gets them, I don't know, in the zone for our
Yeah.
particular meeting.
Well, that's the
And
relationship.
yeah,
That's
yes,
the relationship.
exactly.
That's
Exactly.
wonderful. That's
Yeah.
very wonderful. I mean, I know now this is old school. I mean, rap. I don't even know if the kids listen to Eminem anymore, but he's in recovery and he definitely raps about his recovery. And I can think of a couple more. So I think that's a great technique, a great tool, and it's done in the spirit of relationships. And that's why I myself have some training experience, and I think there is an art to relationships. I mean, there are certain theories and academic things that are written about how to build relationships, but you have to kind of be able to intuitively use those tools. Is that something you see? Does that make sense, Rae?
Oh, I think it does. And I think the foundation of that for me is learning to listen, more than talk. Even though you're there to be the trainer, the more that we can listen to people and help them to have a voice and feel that their voice is valuable, I think the more they learn to trust you. And then that builds that relationship, that kind of two-way street that you have, the more they trust you, the more things are going to develop and go well. And I'm sure that Lorie does that in her group with the kids. I can just see them learning to trust her and being able to really talk to her in a way that maybe they haven't been able to talk to mom or dad or, some other adult in their life. And that's when you plant the seeds, when they trust you.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with what you're saying, but at least those seeds are allowed to get fertile.
That's right. You're plowing the ground or preparing it or something like that. I'm not a green thumb at all.
Sometimes
So,
we're fertilizing it, but that's a whole different thing.
yeah, that's that's great.
But let me just add one
Sure.
more thing to this kind of part of the conversation is that one of the things that that I try to make sure they hear from me is no judgments here. So we had last night, there were two people who said they had a slip. And so, we talked about what that means and why it might be not so good to have a slip, just one thing, and I said, but there's no judgment. Remember, there are no judgments. And one of the kids said, it's really good. It feels good to be able to get that off my chest, knowing that I'm not being judged for it and that, that it's going to be okay. Somebody's not going to come in my face about it. And
right.
that meant a lot to me. That was a really special moment.
Absolutely. And someone very tied to SMART, Bill Greer, who's the board president, talks about labels belonging on cans, not people. And I don't know if that's an original statement or not, but it's a good one because it really does speak to that lack of stigma, the lack of labeling, the exchange vocabulary. So there's no addicts or alcoholics. There's, people who have a substance use disorder or misusing substances. So I do want to jump into a little bit different area as we're beginning to wrap up here. What about negative behaviors that don't involve alcohol and other substances? Do you see any of those, Lorie, in some of your work with teens and younger adults?
I have a couple of cutters. Is that what they call it? A couple of kids like that. And I honestly, because one of the things that came to me out of coming to Smart Recovery was I grew up with such low self-worth. And that's what Smart Recovery did for me. It was really so much not about the alcohol as it was about recognizing that I don't have to feel the way I feel and I can change the way I talk to myself, and that's going to change how I feel. And I wish I would have known that myself when I was younger. So to bring that piece into the meeting and to help them look at their self-talk and recognize that, they're good, they're great just the way they are. Mm-hmm. And to I mean, I probably talk about self-talk every meeting, at least a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's so key. How we, what beliefs we have about ourselves, and whether they're rational, and how do we temper those with facts? Like I do this and that. I'm involved with a lot of things. I have friends and family members who support me. All those things that are also, part of how their thought process. And Rae, do you have anything to add to that particular, this sense of how other behaviors can play into that smart recovery can be used with other behaviors, not just substances?
Well, I think any negative behavior really arises because it has been a way for a young person to cope. It's a way they've coped with a negative situation. Maybe from the time that they were a little child, the messages that they've heard, they've just begun to think of themselves as the black sheep of the family, or the person that is the rescuer that has to rescue the family, or they don't fit in, they're invisible. So they start to tell themselves those messages, and then they look for ways to deal with those really hurtful feelings. So any negative behavior can become a substitute for that, not just drugs and alcohol. And I think it's not just getting the self-talk piece under their belt to help them be kinder to themselves and challenge some of the ways they think about themselves, but then also, as Lorie said, helping them find substitutions. What positive thing can I do for myself instead of doing this negative thing that's bringing me down and causing me problems? What else can I do that I can have some control over, that can help me feel good about myself?
Right.
And I think that's part of what SMART does. It helps people to, while we're taking away, or they're taking away those negatives, we're helping them find things to fill up and replace.
Right.
We
Very
don't
practical.
want there to be an emptiness. We want them to be doing well and
That's right.
and leading full lives.
Right. The living a healthy and balanced life, and coping with those urges without turning to the negative behaviors or the substances. That's such
Right.
an excellent point.
And think about that. I mean, that's a challenge for all of us, all of our lives, right? Not just when it means, things that are happening to us in our lives at different points. And, we need to find better ways to deal with things.
That's right.
Until we die.
Yeah, right. Until our entire lives. That's exactly right. Lorie, as we're wrapping up, anything additionally you want to add about the topic, teens and younger adults, the kind of things that SMART has provided and still provides, of course. Anything else you'd like to add?
This is jumping off of what Rae was just saying, but I went to a medical conference one time. Joe Gerstein and I presented Smart Recovery to them. But the guy before us was from a doctor, worked in a meth lab. And he said something that will always stay with me. He said, we all make mistakes. We all make bad choices. I'm just glad that my bad choice wasn't meth. And it just stuck with me. I was just like so astounded by that yes, and we make it such a negative thing that people have struggled with any substances. And yet it's just because we didn't make that wrong mistake that we're not there.
Yeah.
And just, and I just want the teens to know that, there's nothing wrong and they can fix it if they.
That's right. So they don't feel alone. They don't feel isolated. They get to see other teens or younger adults there in the meeting. And they really are able to kind of trust. Is trust a part of it too, Rae?
Trust, stigmatized too. They're not stigmatized.
Stigmatized, exactly.
The whole thing about that it's not a failure, that a mistake is a learning opportunity.
Right.
How do I want this to be different next time? And what can I do to make that happen? I love the whole SMART idea about looking at a relapse and making that metaphor that if you go on a trip from New York to LA and your car breaks down in Chicago, you don't go all the way back to New York and start all over again. You fix the car in Chicago and you keep going.
Right.
What this is all about is helping kids to take a look at, okay, so this is a mistake. I can learn from this. What do I want to do differently? And how am I going to make that happen? Not a bad person. I don't have to go back to square one. And part of family and friends is helping the parents understand that too, because, looking at their loved one having a relapse, they think, oh my God, this is a failure. They're never gonna get better. No, this is a learning opportunity for them, for you. Let's get them restarted and keep going.
Yeah.
That's a huge perspective.
I love that. I really do think that that's helpful and wise, if you will. And I think that's a wonderful thing to be expressing to anyone who is in recovery, but certainly to teens and younger adults. You've been listening to the Smart Recovery Podcast. We've been talking with Rae Grady. She's an onsite trainer, someone who's had a lot of experience with adolescents. I know that she has helped redesign the youth training for SMART. We've also been talking with Lorie Hammerstrom. She's the lead onsite trainer for SMART and has been involved with kids since education days and even further and more extensively. So, Lorie, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Rae, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
You have been so wonderful, and I really appreciated and enjoyed our conversation. This is Luke Frazier, your host of the Smart Recovery Podcast. Until next time on the podcast, stay healthy and stay connected.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Recovery Podcast. Be sure to visit smartrecovery.org, where you can subscribe to our e-newsletter and check out additional podcasts, blogs, videos, and more. If you found today's podcast interesting and helpful, we encourage you to share it with others. You can also find information about SMART facilitator training and other ways to participate in our important work. To help us continue to provide recovery support to all the individuals who need us, please consider making a tax-deductible donation at smartrecovery.org/donation, or simply click the donate button on our homepage. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you'll join us for the next Smart Recovery Podcast. Until then, stay safe and stay healthy.